Fertile Minds is a podcast brought to you by Virtus Health, who has more than 40 fertility clinics globally and in Australia, including Melbourne IVF, IVF Australia, Queensland Fertility Group and TasIVF. Our goal is to demystify fertility and assist you in getting pregnant faster. Over the coming episodes, we'll be sharing helpful tips and evidence-based advice around key fertility topics. So be sure to browse our episodes and subscribe so you don't miss a thing. You can watch videos of these recordings on our Fertile Minds YouTube channel. Let's dive in to today's episode. Welcome to Fertile Minds. I'm Dr. Joseph Sgroi, an obstetrician, gynecologist and fertility specialist at Melbourne IVF, and I look after women all the way through from preconception, fertility, all the way through pregnancy and childbirth. And today I'm joined by my colleague, Dr. Violet Kieu. Violet, how are you today?
Oh, hi Joe, lovely to be here. Thanks.
Tell us a little bit about you individually in terms of your practice.
Right. So as a subspecialist fertility specialist, I take care of everyone in terms of looking after them before pregnancy, through pregnancy and in early pregnancy. Furthermore, I look after people with very difficult medical conditions, maybe cancer patients, and second opinions as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
Excellent.
And then, if we're lucky enough to be pregnant, I might hand over to you.
Absolutely, as you have done.
I have. Thank you.
Going very well. And so both of us have very unique and different practices. So from my perspective, I'll see a whole broad range of couples, same-sex couples, heterosexual couples, single women as well, and as we both do, all the way through that continuum of fertility, helping them achieve pregnancy. And then, my practice, I get that fortunate pleasure of not only being able to help them, particularly if we're doing IVF and placing that little embryo in, but 9 months later, helping that little embryo come out as a fully fledged human person. And today we're going to be doing a whole range of topics, aren't we, Violet?
That's right. Today's episode, though, is all about the beginning. How to start considering having a family, having a pregnancy, a baby, and we can talk about the women's point of view, a male point of view, a couple's point of view, but as you've alluded to, families come in all different shapes and sizes.
Absolutely. And today we like to kick off our episodes with just a little bit of a punchy. So we're going to do a fertile fast five between you and I, where
Great.
you and I are going to fire off questions at one another and get our listeners to know a little bit about who we are, what drives us, what makes us the people that we are and the doctors that we are. So, Violet, what sparked your interest with and your passion for fertility?
The babies. But furthermore than that, it was education again. I was doing a diploma of obstetrics, I was delivering babies, but I did a mock exam question. And the question was, at what age does the fertility decline? And I was like, got this in the bag, female age 25, 30, 35, 40. 35, surely. No, it was 30. And that made me realize there's so much to learn. And I delved right in to share. It's
interesting, isn't it, that there's these types of things that, in terms of our life cycle, we know so much about the nuts and bolts of how to have a baby, sexual intercourse and all that sort of stuff. But taking a line from Tim Minchin, and those of you who've seen Matilda the musical, I'm very passionate about musicals. I love musicals, and always wanted. In fact, if anyone's out there and they know Tim Minchin or they know the people that produced Matilda the musical, I want to be the doctor that sings Matilda the musical, the most common thing in life. Anyway, he sings the most common thing in life is life. That's the line. And yet the most common thing in life is life, and we don't actually know how we go about creating life. And I think that's one of the things for me that, it helps in terms of our understanding of the way that we as doctors engage with our patients to give them the empowerment to understand how their reproduction works and, more importantly, how to achieve their ultimate goal as well.
So saying all that, what might be one of your most memorable moments in fertility?
Yeah, there's heaps, isn't there? I mean, you look after and care for so many people during their fertility journeys, and I get the pleasure, as I said, of being able to catch babies after the babies are born, and so there's always that sense of seeing a couple or a woman go through that fertility journey and the heartache of sometimes pregnancy loss, and then to be able to be there at the end to finally catch her baby or help her catch her baby rather. And that's just such a wonderful experience and very emotive. And And there's been a lot of tears that I've shed over the journey. But one of the funny, memorable moments was one of my patients who came and saw me, and she'd had a bit of a rough trot with her fertility and had multiple embryo transfers. And I think she was getting reasonably poor egg numbers as well. Anyway, we did one egg collection, and from that we got 4 embryos.
That's amazing.
Absolutely. It was perfect. First one went in and we had a beautiful baby boy. And then the second one in and we had a beautiful baby girl from the same batch of eggs created at the same time. And then the next one was another baby girl. And she had one more embryo left. And she said, look, I actually don't want this one to work, Joe, but, I feel bad. I can't leave it in the freezer. I don't really want to donate it to a couple or donate it to science. So, look, I want to put it in. But, look, if it doesn't work, it doesn't matter, really. And because she'd gone through 3 babies and she was happy. Anyway, she had the embryo transferred, and one of our fertility nurses gave her a call with the result for her pregnancy test. And we can't block out expletives here, but she went, oh, and then had an expletive, right? So, and she was not upset. She was actually very happy. But we had like quads that came out from one single egg collection and subsequent transfers. And of course, she went on to have. You never regret having babies. That's what I tell my patients. You never regret having 1, 2, 3, or 4 babies. But I think from her perspective, she actually was. Yeah, she was overjoyed she was pregnant, but it wouldn't have mattered to her if she wasn't. So that was probably one of the most rewarding experiences for me. Like, I think cricketers like to have hat tricks. Maybe us as fertility specialists like to have something very similar. You, of course, as you said, have done subspecialty training in fertility, and part of that focus, of course, is being heavily involved in research. And of course, what drives medicine and the innovation of medicine really is the research that then allows us to forge forward in terms of healthcare. So what excites you about fertility, research, and where we're moving forward into the future?
Yeah, there's so much, and it's hard to pick just a few. So I might just choose 2. One of the broader things, I think it affects all our lives, is technology. And we have to see that there are different ways we're integrating artificial intelligence. We know that at Melbourne IVF, we've had some very high quality research published in the Nature Journal about how artificial intelligence can help select the best embryo to transfer. And in fact, your patient had 4 best embryos to transfer, right? But also, with big data, AI can help us look at patterns and how best to do a stimulation, what stats are to help guide us, just give us more real world data that we can use when we're helping our patients. More focus, maybe a smaller topic though, is how else do we help people with their fertility? And one of the things is in vitro maturation. So as people may know, in IVF, we help grow not one, but several eggs to maturity. But that takes time. It's about half a period cycle. So an average period cycle is 4 weeks, so half is 2 weeks of stim, roughly. But what if people, again, need to go for their cancer treatment, or they live rural or remotely, or other medical conditions that they just need the eggs taken out now? So there are ways and labs and very clever people and scientists looking at how we might mature immature eggs in the lab for the future. So watch that space.
Yeah, I think we're going to find that fertility is going to massively change over the course of the coming years, absolutely. And artificial intelligence, I mean, I follow evolving AI on Instagram and the stuff that's coming out there in terms of robots and stuff. I'm looking forward to the future. Bring it on.
Joe, what's the most important advice you have for individuals or couples undergoing fertility treatments?
I think the thing that I'd like to say here is that you're not alone. Look, I think, all of us in terms of our experiences are collated together, aren't they? And we live in a world where we're probably more connected through social media than ever before.
Absolutely.
But we're totally and utterly completely isolated. And, there's not that village that we used to have back in the good old days where there were people around you supporting you through, hardships or supporting you through fertility or supporting you through pregnancy. And, women in the past, if they were going through childbirth, for example, there would not be just one woman in the room as a midwife. There would be their mum, their cousin, their auntie, so on and so forth. So we've lost that sense of village community support that I think that's been there for such a long period of time. And I think what you and I and all fertility specialists really understand that the journey to becoming pregnant has taxes on people both physically and mentally. And I think the thing that I want to say is that you're not alone. There are people who are there, including your fertility specialists, of course, that can help guide you through that whole process. And if you are finding the struggle real, and if there is, concerns with respect not to yourself but also to your relationship with your partner, then reach out for help, because part of the thing about Melbourne IVF, it's not just a nameless and faceless organisation. We're one of the longest IVF clinics in Melbourne, and along with that comes a level of expertise and experience that exceeds far beyond other clinics. And we've got counsellors, nurses, the doctors, our embryologists, all there supporting you, not only from the perspective of the physicality, but also from the perspective of your mental health and well-being. Because part of being physically well and part of being mentally well is what's going to achieve the ultimate goal of pregnancy. And I think that's really the most salient thing. All the bells and whistles in terms of what we do in the laboratory and how we interact with our patients is one thing, but really looking after your own mental well-being is the most important thing. We know, of course, that there are a lot of misconceptions with respect to fertility, and you alluded to one just earlier in terms of, when does a woman's fertility decline? But what are the common misconceptions that you hear out there in social media and the like that sort of you'd like to dispel?
The biggest one I see, either in person or on social media, is the AMH, the anti-Müllerian hormone. So this is a blood test. It's a protein, and it can give us a sort of estimate of egg number, egg reserve, right? And we use it all the time. But you have to be careful, because I would say that age is the most important number over AMH. And I see people worried about their AMH, or on the other side, falsely reassured that AMH is fine, because really it might be fine. But if you're 38 and it's normal, you don't know in 2 years' time if it's going to go down or not. So actually, even a normal or high AMH at a certain age, over 35, you still can take action, including fertility treatments or egg freezing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the things we are going to talk about a little bit, just as a segue, is egg freezing. Because, I often say to women and to people who are contemplating pregnancy that you should consider pregnancy when you're physically, financially, socially, emotionally, and medically ready to do so. There's those 5 things, yeah? But we're never going to achieve all those 5 things. Women particularly are wanting to increase it. Well, they're trying to advance their careers, and therefore, as a result of that, delaying their fertility. But, that extra house that you want to buy, or the additional car that you want to get, I mean, that's achievable, absolutely. But when it comes to the expense of your own reproduction, that's where there's a problem. And I'm actually reminded of even my own personal experience with my wife. I had the wonderful pleasure of being a resort doctor in an island in Fiji. It was one of the best jobs. In fact, just as good as being a fertility specialist. And it was an awesome job. I was a resort doctor on an island in Fiji. But on this island, there were a lot of couples that were coming to the island basically to relax, because they were in their late 30s trying to have a baby. And my wife and I at the time were well below 30. In fact, my wife was 24 at the time. And all these 37, 38 and 39-year-olds were coming there to basically relax. They were doing their fertility journey, some of them IVF, and they all impressed on my wife that if they had their time again, they would have gone ahead and become pregnant before the age of 30. And of course, back then we didn't have egg freezing. This is, I'm a bit older than 30 now. And so there wasn't egg freezing out there. But sometimes now, if you're contemplating in those first few years of your 30s, where we talked about before that the fertility starting to decline, there's an opportunity to preserve your fertility because you aren't feeling physically, financially, socially and emotionally ready to become pregnant, then egg freezing is an option for you. So in your perspective, what are you seeing as some of the trends with respect to egg freezing, and what are some of the reasons women are coming to you with respect to egg freezing?
Taking it broadly, ANZARD, which is the Australia-New Zealand Assisted Reproductive Database. So in Australia and New Zealand, all IVF and IUI, uterine insemination cycles, are recorded. So it's really important. We've got the data. But what they've said, there has been an 89% increase in egg freezing over the last 2 years. 89, 90, that's astronomical. And I think there are many reasons that feed into this, science, social, individual reasons why there's been an increase in egg freezing. Firstly, the science. We know a decade ago, 2014, the American Society of Reproductive Medicine said egg freezing is no longer experimental. So we've got the science to do this. Eggs are now surviving with the fast freeze or the vitrification in the freezer, and they survive the thaw. Fantastic. And then society, you're absolutely right. I cannot imagine, I may have to be more imaginative, but a more busy time than the 30s, right? You're trying to work out, you've been asked throughout your life, what do you want to do? So you've got your study, maybe you've got work, maybe you've got travel, maybe you've got your passion project, your side gig, your podcast, you've got all these things. But then where does that leave time for planning for fertility? And in the biopsychosocial research, not only is it one's individual goals, it's also the lack of a partner or a suitable partner. Many people want right place, right time, right person, okay? And if that's not happening for you, like your 5 key points, maybe egg freezing is now an individual option that people are coming to see me. And not to be such a downer about it, but I do see quite a few people who unexpectedly or not what they had expected get divorced or end a long-term relationship that they thought they would have a child with that person, and now they're 36, 37, 38, and this is not where they thought they would be. And that's where we can offer a discussion about egg freezing.
Yeah, but I 100% agree with all of that. I think women find it a lot difficult in terms of dating opportunities. And in actual fact, the other day I was reading an article that, in the 1950s, the way that we met our partners was predominantly through family. And then over the years, it evolved to friends. And then as the years went on, it went to people that were, in your social network or at work. And now predominantly, and again, this whole thing about being isolated and the social connections, a lot of it now is online. And it is very difficult when you're swiping right and swiping left to find out the right person. But it's one of the things, and often women will be in a long-term relationship. And this is a little thing for the boys out there or the guys out there. We always think about women's reproduction actually declining, but there is a biological clock for guys as well. So sometimes guys will be in these long-term relationships and then pull the pin on it, or the female will also pull the pin on it, and that then leaves the woman, unfortunately, scrambling to try to sort out her fertility. But guys, you've got to realise as well, there is an element in terms of your own fertility that declines as well. And I think, look, we're not going to talk too much more about egg freezing today because that's coming up in episode 2 with our colleagues, Dr. Melissa Cameron and Marina Demitinko. And they'll delve into the world of egg freezing, how it all works within the laboratory, what are the success rates in terms of egg freezing. And then, you'll have a better understanding about what to do with respect to egg freezing. So today we're going to talk about a range of topics about how do we start this journey to becoming pregnant. What do we need to do when we're concentrating on those aspects in terms of our fertility? And we're going to start off today about, how does conception work? I think conception actually works even before you're contemplating becoming pregnant. It's in those 100 days before you're actually thinking we want to get pregnant that particular month. And that's about improving the aspects of both egg and sperm quality. And in terms of doing that, we want to reduce our toxins in our environment. There is so much plastics out there. These contain phthalates, or what are termed forever chemicals, that can disrupt our hormones and as a result lead to poor egg development, also poor development within the embryo, and also have implications in terms of pregnancy. So having a Mediterranean-based diet, reducing toxins in our environment, not drinking out of plastic bottles, of course, trying to reduce all our processed foods, that's going to have particularly wonderful effects, not only in terms of the health of both eggs, but also sperm. And the next thing is really understanding how our biology works. And I said this before, you know, the most common thing in life is life, yet we don't even know what's happening inside our bodies. And, you know, when I look at my kids who are in their late teens and the education that they've been given at school, there's very limited education about actually becoming pregnant, a hell of a lot of education about contraception and preventing pregnancy. So for so long, we get focused on don't become pregnant, don't become pregnant, don't become pregnant, that when we finally decide, hey, listen, we actually want to become pregnant now, we have no idea what's happening. So, of course, it starts with the egg and it also starts with the sperm. But how do these two little people meet together? Now, we're talking about heterosexual couples here. So to our same-sex couples, we're going to talk a little bit about you guys later and, of course, our single women. But as a woman, inside your ovaries, you contain all the eggs you're ever going to have. In fact, the most amount of eggs you have is when you're inside your mummy's tummy. It's about 4 million eggs, and they'll slowly decrease over the course of your reproductive life until, unfortunately, women go through menopause. Now, every single month you release an egg. The way I like to think about eggs is I want you to imagine the eggs are like little seedlings sitting in a sunflower box. Now, every month, a woman will plant a certain number of seedlings. They might be 10, they might be 5, they might be 20. But the brain secretes a hormone called follicle-stimulating hormone. This acts like fertilizer for one of these little seedlings. So you can imagine these little seedlings sitting in a flower box. Along comes the fertilizer and a bit of water. One of the big, beautiful sunflowers eventually blooms into this big, beautiful sunflower, and it blocks out the sunlight of the rest. And so every month, a woman gets to pick up that sunflower and put it in a vase. And very similarly, what happens inside the ovaries is one of the follicles gets bigger and bigger and bigger under the influence of the brain until eventually it releases an egg. Now, if you think of your body, just imagine your body in your chest. Think of that as being your uterus and your arms as being the fallopian tubes. They're like the tubes that suck up the egg. So what happens is your ovary is holding on to, like, let's say your hand is holding onto a small basketball. That's the ovary. And so the egg gets released, it comes down the fallopian tube, travels down that fallopian tube. And what happens during the process of having sex is sperm gets deposited at the top of the vagina. And these are like little marathon runners. They're sprinting towards the egg. So they're coming through the vagina, they're going up through the uterus, and they're coming around the fallopian tube until eventually they meet the egg in the fallopian tube. And that's where the magic happens. That's where the egg and the sperm will finally fertilize and create a beautiful little embryo. And that embryo will travel its way down a little bit like a little beam of a little light beam coming down a little tube there, and it comes down through the fallopian tube and eventually implants itself into the uterus. Now, generally speaking, women will have a 28-day cycle. Now, of course, you may not have a 28-day cycle. It's not a rule. It's not something you have to have. Women can have very varied cycles, anywhere between 21 to 35. And, of course, if you're having longer cycles, then you really probably need to see a fertility specialist, certainly if you're having shorter cycles as well. But you can predict roughly when you're going to ovulate based on the day, or how long your cycles are, and then subtract 14 days. So let's say, for example, you have a 28-day cycle. If you subtract 14 days, then ovulation is occurring on 14. Now, remember, when we're talking about days of how long your periods are or how long your cycles are, it's from the first day that you actually have your period to the next time that you have a period. So that's day one of the full flow of your period to the next day one, and that's 28 days. Well, then you'll ovulate day 14. If that time interval is 35 days, then that means your ovulation's occurring around day 21. And so when you understand roughly when ovulation's occurring, that is the time that flower is ready to be picked, that sunflower is ready to be put in the vase, or that egg is ready to be released from the ovary. And as a result, that's the time that you guys need to be having sexual intercourse. And so most of us will suggest having sex if you're having a 28-day cycle with ovulation occurring day 14, having sex every second day from around about day 8 or 9 of your cycle through to around about day 18, because then we'll know that there's enough sperm that's going to be there at the time that the egg's going to be released. So we know that sperm stays in the genital tract of a woman for around 2 to 3 days. So you don't have to be precise. It's not like, oh my God, the egg's coming out, we need to have sex right now. Because if you'd had sex 2 or 3 days before, in actual fact, there's going to be some sperm there. But doing that consistently and frequently is going to give you the best chance of pregnancy. Now, of course, there are other things you can do. There's ovulation trackers. There's, of course, our health app now on Apple. That's got heaps and heaps of ways to be able to determine specifically when ovulation occurs. You, if you're in tune with your body, can determine when you're ovulating based on cervical mucus, pain. Some women will get pain when they ovulate, a little bit of ovulatory pain. And if you're tracking your cycles with blood temperature, your body temperature, you'll notice a bit of an increase in your basal body temperature first thing in the morning after ovulation. So these are the ways of being able to determine specifically when's the best time to conceive. And again, as I said before, having sex around ovulation is going to achieve the best chances of pregnancy. But from your perspective, Violet, what are the things that can help improve your chances of conceiving?
Joe, thanks. You've mentioned quite a lot of them already, but I'll just want to give just a little bit more detail about what the evidence shows about trying. So, as you know, the egg is tiny on day 1 and becomes that big, beautiful sunflower on day 14. What that growth phase of the egg is the estrogen rising, but it needs a signal from the brain, a trigger, let's say, called the luteinizing hormone to really release that egg or that sunflower. And so there are things that people can use, and that can be urinary LH or luteinizing hormone surge sticks. So that can help. And actually in Cochrane, large databases of information, that's actually shown to be helpful, actually more so than the other ways. Cervical mucus is estrogen dependent, so it thickens just before you ovulate, and as you say, with the body temperature, that's progesterone, so that's after ovulation. So it's good to know and understand your body. But there are things that one can try, and sometimes people do use apps. Apps have their place, but one would say you could equally just write your period or other dates in your calendar to know your cycle. You're absolutely right. We are really being more aware of environmental factors that affect everyone, male, female, all of us, anyone. And so agreed, really take care of the environment and yourself. So that's reducing your volatile organic compounds. That is taking your shoes off when you're coming in the door, washing your fruit, not touching the black bit of those heat-pressed receipts, because they are, again, your forever chemicals that we're all exposed to. The simple things, microwaving food, if you use a microwave, in glass or ceramics rather than in plastics, right? So that's just general advice for people. Specific advice for people, I would say, is occupation-based. We've been classically taught, in medical school about asking people what they do. So you've got industrial workers who might be exposed to fumes. You have, I see people who work in beauty and nail industry. So again, chemicals. But even your person who's at the desk, if you're a male and you have a laptop on your lap, that could raise the temperature of the testis and affect testosterone and sperm production. So all these things, and it's not to scare people. It's just it's like a sports coach. And my understanding of sports coaches is like all the high performance athletes are also good, but it's your 1% improvements on different things. So just shifting the dial on all these different factors. Goes without saying, doctor's going to tell you, don't drink, don't smoke. And these things are things that it's a good time to reassess. And if you need help or just a discussion, see a GP. They're really good at talking through some of these things. And of course, when you see a fertility specialist such as myself or Joe, we'll ask about other medications. So your regular medications, but also any, funny medications, any steroids or recreational drugs. And again, how to modify that. I mentioned GPs. I think a GP is fantastic because if you're lucky enough to have a general practitioner who knows you and your partner and your circumstances, you've got a rapport, and they might be the person who helped you with contraceptive, pills, tablets, Mirena, etc., pap smears, but also can help you, what sort of time frame do you want to be trying? Again, exactly as you said, having intercourse around that time of ovulation. If you've got your regular period, so track the 14 days. But if it's irregular, you might need some more help here. Yeah. You might average out the number of days, or you might have some blood tests to check out the hormones or ultrasounds just to see what the uterus and ovary look like. So what else can you do to help improve your chances of conceiving? We've talked about lifestyle, but let's dive into the nuts and bolts of that. So the research shows that there's not one particular diet that's better than another, but there are some popular ones that people do mention, and this includes things such as a Mediterranean diet, so that's having your olive oil, your vegetables, but there's also other, healthy diets such as Asian or Japanese diets. So it's really just about balance. And I think having assistance with a fertility aligned dietitian can help as well, and they're medically accredited by board. In terms of regular exercise, one can extrapolate from some government guidelines. So, for example, people with polycystic ovarian syndrome, they have a lot of eggs, but they don't always ovulate well, and they can find it hard to shift weight, etc. And the Australian government has, released guidelines that talks about at minimum 3 times a week, 30 minutes of regular exercise. It does, increase your heart rate, and you can always increase that to more, 45 minutes, etc. I would say, just very generally speaking, not just cardio, but also some weight trainings, core as well. And exercise is brilliant, as we do know, for mental health improvements as well, getting your body moving. Supplements. Now, this is a big issue in that there's so many things out there. What myself and other obstetrician fertility specialists would recommend would, yes, definitely be a pregnancy multivitamin, even if you're egg freezing, because really an egg is a cell, a really important big cell, and we just want the optimal environment. So your everyday over-the-counter pharmacy pregnancy multivitamin, so many brand names, your choice, but they include things such as your vitamin B group, so quite a few of those, your vitamin C, vitamin D, as well as folate to prevent spina bifida, as well as iodine to help a healthy baby thyroid, or also the healthy egg, but also things such as iron, zinc, selenium, or your essential key minerals and metals. So these are very important things. Now then, there are other supplements that you might hear about, such as coenzyme Q10 and other antioxidants. So if you think about a biscuit and you put it on a table, it'll get soggy. It'll get oxidized. The oxygen will soften the biscuit. And that's the same principle with an egg. You leave it too long or too old and it'll have free radicals attacking the outside. And so to protect against that, you have antioxidants, and you might hear about green tea having antioxidants. The evidence is good in animal studies for coenzyme Q10, but sort of on the edge for human studies. So if it's elective, I would say if you want to take it, yep, there is some evidence, and if you don't, you're not doing yourself harm that way. Okay, so and that's where it's important to talk to a fertility specialist about the ins and outs of some of these extra things. And then to end, we live in a fast-paced world. I don't know about you, but to eat well, to exercise, to take my right vitamins, to get enough sleep, to get to work on time, this is all stressful. Traffic, things out of your control, etc. Waiting, on a fertility test result. These are all stressful because you don't know, what's coming. You're not going to get to work on time. You're not going to have a normal test result, etc. And stress actually, feels bad, but biochemically can increase the cortisol and adrenaline and all these other, hormones in your body. And they just interplay with your fertility hormones. And in fact, we do know that really, really stressed people can actually skip their periods because the body's in a bit of a flight or fight situation. So stress management is absolutely important. And what we do know in IVF is that whilst things such as acupuncture don't statistically increase the success rate of IVF, they statistically decrease your stress. So it's not a bad thing to do if you enjoy doing these other things. Do your yoga, do your Pilates gently, do your sports just to have an outlet. So trying all that, what do you think what happens if you don't succeed?
And that is one of the things, people will sit out there and there's, we live in an Uber Eats society, don't we? Like tonight, if I want Thai food, I'm just going to dial up on Uber Eats. I'm going to have Thai, yeah? And if tomorrow night it's going to be chicken cacciatore, then, I'll just go to my local Italian restaurant and Bob's your uncle, there it'll be. But fertility doesn't come like that. Yeah, it takes a lot of work. And even in the circumstances of a young couple who are able to achieve pregnancy quite naturally, it may take up to 12 months in order to conceive. Now, if we start off with 100 couples, less than the age of 35, and it was January 2025, let's say, and we had 100 people, by February we would expect around about 20 perhaps to be pregnant. The maths is going to be a lot easier. We know that it's around about 10 to 15% per month, or 15 to 20% per month that will conceive. Let's make it 20 because it's easy maths. So in the first month, in January, 20 will be pregnant and 80 won't be. Now in the next month, come February, 20% of the remaining 80 will be pregnant. So that's, let's say, 16, leaving 64 who aren't. And then in the subsequent month, another 12 get pregnant, leaving 52 who aren't. And of course, it whittles its way all the way down so that by the time we get to the end of the first full year of trying, around 80 to 85% of couples are pregnant. And of course, unfortunately, 15 to 20% aren't. And that's when we start getting a little bit worried about your issues with respect to your fertility. Now, if you're under the age of 35 and everything is going well, now what do I mean by everything's going well? Well, I have a little acronym called SSROOP. That's the 6 things that you need in order to achieve pregnancy. So S stands for sex. So is sex good? Are you able to have, well, not good, but are you able to have sex without any pain? And some people don't actually have sex. They find it very difficult and uncomfortable to have sex. So you're going to go see your fertility specialist or your gynecologist about that. Is there sperm? Well, it's a bit difficult to know whether there's sperm. So if your partner or if you're male listening to this podcast and you've had concerns in the past, like you've had undescended testes as a child, you've had trauma to the testes, then go and see the fertility specialist or your GP sooner. A receptive uterus, a uterus that's structurally normal without any impediment to pregnancy. So again, if you're a woman and you've got heavy periods, painful periods, then these are the signals that perhaps something within the uterine environment is not going to facilitate pregnancy. Ovulation, and Violet alluded to this before. If you're not having regular menstrual cycles and you don't know where ovulation's occurring, well then how are you going to get pregnant? So again, you're going to see someone a lot sooner than 12 or 6 months, and I'll talk about those time frames in a minute. If you've got you need to have open tubes, because I talked about it before. The egg needs to travel down this fallopian tube for sperm and the egg to meet. So if you've had a history of sexually transmitted infections in the past, or if there's been concerns with respect to perhaps a previous surgery within your belly, like an appendix or a ruptured appendix, then perhaps the tubes are blocked. And we need to know whether the tubes are open in order to achieve pregnancy. The last thing I talk about is patience. And the reason why I put patience in there is because of that Uber Eats story that I said before. It does take a little while to achieve pregnancy. But if you feel that everything under that SSROOP thing that I just talked about before is okay, then under the age of 35, give it a good 9 months of trying to conceive. Then perhaps go and see your GP and make an appointment to see a fertility specialist by that 12-month mark. If you're over the age of 35, well, because of this issue of egg quality, and we talked about the egg quality diminishing from 30, well, perhaps we want to see you a little bit earlier because we want to optimise the chances of natural conception in the first instance. And if we're not able to achieve pregnancy, then use more advanced techniques in order to achieve pregnancy. But one of the things I want to leave everyone with, just in this whole point of the struggles that a lot of people have with respect to their fertility, is to understand that you're absolutely not alone. 1 in 6 Australian couples, and in fact couples around the world for the argument's sake, will have difficulty in becoming pregnant. And when you see your GP to have a referral to see one of us as fertility specialists, it's not that we're going to prescribe IVF as the get-go. We are fertility specialists. I mean, we're not sitting out there with our voodoo sticks and looking up to the gods and saying, hey, listen, we want this couple to become pregnant. We're not those type of fertility hoodoo doctors. But we're trained in being able to optimise the chances of natural conception in the first instance. And then we have the capability and the ability to utilise technology and the advancements in terms of medical treatments in order to facilitate pregnancy through the process of IVF. So it's not just about improvements to health, improvements to the egg and sperm quality, and that's what a lot of our Eastern doctors tend to do, the traditional Chinese medicine doctors. We facilitate that. I really think there is this combination of East and West medicine really combining very well with respect to fertility. But then you've got the catch-all, which is us as fertility specialists that can help with all of that Eastern stuff. And in addition to that, also help with all the Western stuff as well, which is the advancements in technology. But of course, it takes a leap of faith, doesn't it? First of all, you've got to acknowledge that there's a problem. And then the second thing is, where do you find that person to help you? So Violet, how do we get started with this whole thing? We're having a little bit of difficulties trying to get pregnant. Where do we go to first?
I'll go back to your point about Melbourne IVF being longest and expertise and memory, right? So we have experts who are leaders in our field, and it's standing on the shoulders of giants. And, that's why I'm a doctor here. But there's 20 or so doctors, so you can choose someone, who you zing with, someone who you think meets your philosophy of communication, of welcoming both you and your partner in your situation. So I think medicine, once you come to see a fertility specialist, once you've chosen who you feel comfortable with, it's we're trained for medical history, physical examination, investigation, then management plan. But I would encapsulate all that as a story. You're coming to us and we're going to listen to your story and all the things you've said, how long you've been trying, what your periods are like, how, if intercourse is happening or not, any other medical, surgical history, medications you're taking, any investigation your GP has already done for either of you, and some of the baseline or basic or first line investigations does include hormone tests to see if you're ovulating. It does include a pelvic ultrasound to make sure, as Joe's mentioned, that your uterus and ovaries look normal, because, we're all born, and then some of us are born with things that we just don't even know that we have. Some people don't have a uterus. Some people have a uterine septum. Some people have polyps, fibroids, all these little things that we just have to navigate on the path to fertility. Some people might be born with less eggs than usual or more eggs, and sometimes we can see that. For the male, the main test is the semen analysis, and we look at three main things. We look at the count, so the number of sperm, the speed, what's called progressive motility, and also the shape of usually the head of the sperm, to see if it can penetrate the egg. And if any of these three are reduced, we'll be like, right, we're on a health bender. We're going to take care of yourself, take that laptop off. You're going to do your exercise. You're going to take some multivitamins, and we'll repeat that sperm test in a number of months.
I'm glad you said health bender there. Absolutely.
And as you said, eggs take that 100 years. 100 years,
yeah. Oh my God.
100 days.
Actually, that's not necessarily false, yeah? Because we talk about our grandmothers having our mothers inside their belly. And so there is this epigenetics, this whole thing about, you are actually carrying potentially your future grandchildren if you're a woman. Yeah. So the reality is, it's not just about, well, not 100 years, but, it's close to that 60 to 50 years. Yeah, absolutely. So
that was a bit Freudian, but that's a good point. The 100 days for the eggs is similar for the male, as 70 odd, 3 months for the health of the sperm. And that's why we would give a bit of interval before we retest the sperm. And they are sort of the first line tests. And then, I would welcome someone back and then go through these results up to and including the anti-Mullerian hormone as well, just to, and again, that's a whole separate, conversation, but that's a test that you just need to be able to interpret in context of you. Just to reiterate, a low anti-Mullerian hormone, as long as you ovulate or have one major egg release per month, you have that monthly chance, okay? And the AMH is about reserves and potentially the number of eggs you might get at an IVF stimulation, so a little bit different. So
if I can just interject there, because I think that's a really important point, because there's a lot of anxiety that comes out with respect to the AMH. And utilising that analogy I said before about the sunflower seedling sitting in a sunflower box. When you've got a high ovarian reserve, you might plant 20 sunflower seedlings, but what happens every single month is only one of those sunflower seedlings gets fertilised and watered. So every month you're still only releasing one sunflower. And if you've only got one or two, then guess what? You're producing just one sunflower seedling. So irrespective of your AMH, you are still producing one egg every month if you're having regular menstrual cycles. And to the point of IVF then, when we're doing IVF, we utilise the AMH really only in terms of IVF, because rather than stimulate just one little sunflower seedling, we're stimulating all those sunflower seedlings. It's almost like putting them in a hydroponic system, giving them hydroponic system and lots of super fertilizer to grow all the sunflower seedlings up. That's what we do in IVF, and we can collect multiple eggs. But your AMH is not an indicator of your ability to be able to conceive. I think that's a really important point, because a lot of people come, and I'm sure they do to you, anxious about this AMH. They really do, don't they?
Yeah. So I think that is definitely a conversation we both have every day with people. So just to recap, you need an egg that's mature. You need a path that's open fallopian tube. So in that pathway, we might even do a tubal flush ultrasound in addition or different to your pelvic ultrasound that looks at shape. And now this is a dynamic study to see if there's flow in the tubes, and you need your sperm. So those three, sort of major things. What actually I'd also like to talk about is genetics. And
big one.
Yeah. So just to touch on it, but each of us is half our genetic mum, half dad. And
I'm more my dad. I just
But what that means is that sometimes we carry hidden genetic conditions. And if we have one copy of a gene, which is our blueprint or our DNA blueprint, we still might be okay medically. But if we reproduce with a person who also carries a hidden gene or a recessive condition, there's a 1 in 4 chance that we might have an affected child who might have a severe and significant disease. And as you know, there's the Mackenzie's mission, the story of a young girl, unfortunately, who died before the age of 2 of spinal muscular atrophy, and her really strong parents advocated, and now it is free testing for all Australians, the 3 gene, so the cystic fibrosis, spinal muscular atrophy and Fragile X.
And I suppose hats off. I mean, for those of you who know the Mackenzie mission story, I mean, Rachel Casella, who was the mother of Mackenzie, fought long and hard in order to gain access to, for Australians to gain access to Medicare-funded genetic carrier screening. And through her great efforts and that of her parents and also her partner, Johnny, the federal government, we are now one of the only countries in the world where we have access to bulk billed or, government-funded genetic carrier screening for the likes of cystic fibrosis.
And you've spoken to her as well, is that right?
Yeah, I've spoken to Rachel. She's a lovely woman.
Yeah.
And, quite passionate about giving people empowerment in terms of their reproductive health and the opportunities, therefore, to find out if you do have a genetically inherited condition you can pass on to a child, that you're able to utilise IVF to prevent that suffering that's going to happen to the child. And I mean, they went through a hell of a lot with the Mackenzie in terms of her diagnosis and, of course, her sad passing. But the legacy that's continued as a result of her is phenomenal, because it's having far more reach than one could possibly ever imagine, with, giving us as Australians the opportunity to be able to, number one, understand whether we're going to have a child with additional needs or potentially prevent having a child with additional needs. So that's a really strong and important point. And this is going back to my point about East and Western medicine. Don't poo-poo either one of them. One of the things I find is a lot of couples will go and seek the advice of a traditional Chinese medicine person or a naturopath, but never have had this discussion about genetic carrier screening. And it's so fundamentally important to understand what biology you have, what genetics you have that potentially is going to pass on to your child. And we are trained, obviously as medical specialists, and having gone through the conventional medical schooling, we're trained in all this sort of stuff. So seek the advice of as many people as you can. Don't limit yourself to one single village, because it's a broad church out there. We're ultimately all got the same goal, which is to achieve pregnancy. So don't cut people off because you think, I'm going to go and see a doctor, that's going to mean IVF. But what other things would you think? And we talked about semen analysis and we talked about the tubes. Is there anything else that we need to do before we move and embark on what the starting advice? So
just to finish off about the genetic screening, don't just take our word for it. The Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists made this as a strong recommendations for GPs and fertility specialists and obstetricians and anyone working in the female health space. And it's not mandatory, and sometimes you just need to read if it's suitable for you or for not. I would reiterate that mental health as well, as you said, and at Melbourne IVF, it isn't just us, fertility doctors. We have a strong team of nurses, of counsellors, and of course in the lab. So when you come to see us, we will take a comprehensive review of your story, and the advice might be, change nothing. You're doing well. Keep on going.
We're the coaches, but we're also your greatest fans, aren't we?
Absolutely. Support. Aussie, Aussie, Aussie. So that's one option, support. But also then we can add, as you said, some of these Western aligned with Eastern treatments, such as timed intercourse. So we can help you with ultrasounds or blood tests just to say this is a great time to have sex.
Yep.
Or even give you a tablet in ovulation induction to really help. For example, women with polycystic ovarian syndrome might have so many little sunflower seeds, they all block each other out, that they don't grow that nice big sunflower once a month. So we could help with some medication to gently encourage one to grow, and then we could time sex. And then if there's maybe mild male factor or that's not working, unexplained infertility, put the sperm high up in the uterus through insemination. And then, as you said, the very sort of last step there is to pull out the big guns and discuss in vitro fertilization, which is taken over the whole period cycle, taking the eggs, taking the sperm, putting back in the uterus.
Yeah.
So we do open a range of options, but we're not going to force anything. It is all your choice, but we can give stats and the likelihood of reaching a pregnancy.
Absolutely. So for couples starting out on their fertility journey, obviously your first point of call is your general practitioner. They're going to be a wonderful resource with respect to not only referring you to the appropriate fertility specialist. You may also choose to go to a broad range of fertility services. And we'd encourage you, obviously, to go to either the Melbourne IVF, the IVF Australia, Queensland Fertility Group, or the TasIVF websites to see if there's a doctor that's suitable for you. There's a whole broad church of doctors. We come from a broad range of medical backgrounds and experiences. Some of us got grey hair, some of us got black hair, some of us got blonde hair. There's a whole range of people. And there's also videos there that you can actually look at and see, is that person going to bond well with me? So starting off that journey is going to be particularly important. And it's taking that initial step, isn't it? It's like, going for that first run after a long period of time of not being able to run, and it's going to be hard, but that the rewards are going to be there at the end. And so exactly the same. It's going to be difficult. You're going to have a few false starts perhaps, but ultimately finding that right person to be able to navigate that journey with you is going to be particularly important. One of the things I always say to everyone, and this is not true just in terms of fertility and obstetrics and women's health, but in terms of everything in terms of medicine, is there's not the best doctor. There's the best doctor for you. So, there may not necessarily be, I want to go and see that particular doctor because I hear they're the best. They actually might be the worst doctor for you. They don't listen to you. They don't respond to you. I think part of being a good doctor is understanding the wishes, wants and desires of your patients, but also in addition to that, acting on those results and those wishes, wants and desires. So start out your journey, see a GP, jump on our relative websites through the Virtus Health Group, find out a doctor that you like or you can bond with, make an appointment, see them, and then start the journey of investigation as Violet's alluded to, looking at the sperm, looking at the eggs, looking at the ovaries, looking at the tubes, looking at the uterus, and let's see if we can get you pregnant sooner rather than later, because that's ultimately your goal, and it's the goal of us. We love it when our patients get pregnant. I mean, we get updates on our telephone every day, or our mobile apps every day, about the patients that are pregnant in our practices, and we cheer every single time. I always feel, I'm sure you do as well, Violet, I always have a little bit of a "you beauty" when I see one of my patients who's pregnant, and that's a daily occurrence for us. We get to have that gratification every single day, and we want you to have that same positive experience.
What I would say, best doctor for you, best team, and yes, we both are trained as obstetricians, gynecologists and our fertility specialists, but within the team we can refer or help you for your individual needs. So if you need that advanced endometriosis surgery, Got it. But also, if it's a male factor, we have physician-trained endocrinologists who've had additional training in andrology, but also access to urological surgeons if you need to go inside the testes to get sperm. So again, best doctor for you, best team for you. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Alrighty. So before we end today, we'll do a myth buster. So with so much information about fertility, it can be difficult to separate fact from fiction. One of the biggest things I hear about are young couples who come in really distraught. You know, we're both young and healthy. So why are we having problems conceiving? You know, they've done all their diet, exercise, yoga, Pilates, but it's not working out. And this is a situation, you know, two things here. One is that there's something called unexplained infertility. We just can't pinpoint why this is not working. But also, if you haven't had the tests, it's the unknown unknowns. You might simply have something such as a polyp and obstructive growth in your uterus that's benign. And if we just simply had a hysteroscopy and removed it, you might be able to fall pregnant really easily. So seeking advice at the right time early is not a bad thing, in my opinion, because simply time ticks on. And one of the unfortunate situations I find actually are two young, healthy people who've left it instead, 2, 4, 6 years. And they're like, we just thought it'll just happen for us. We weren't stressed. But now they're in their late 30s. It's like, well, guys, let's do what we can now. The best time was 2, 4, 6 years ago. The next best time is now. But really, to learn from that situation and to seek help appropriately.
Thank you so much for listening today. We hope you found our episode helpful as you embark on your fertility journey. So Violet, if we want to find out about you, where do we find you? How can we engage with you? What are your channels?
So I actually write a regular newsletter and that's on Substack, and it's called the Freeze Fertility Newsletter, and that's about the conferences that I go to, new research and things that affect the fertility space. I'm also on Instagram at Dr. Violet Kieu, that's spelled Kieu, or visit my website, drvioletkieu.com.au. So if people want to follow you on social media, Joe, where do they go?
Well, look, you can follow me on Instagram at Dr. Joseph Sgroi, or you can listen to my podcast. I'll be part of a podcast with Beck Judd and also Monique Bowley called Hello Bump on the Mama Mia Network, and that was all talking about pregnancy. But also I've got a podcast with Eliza Carr at 8 Baby Baking and Kid Raising, and both of those, of course, on Apple, Spotify. And as part of my commitment to a whole range of I love being on podcasts. I love it. I'm also part of the Doctor and Doula podcast through the Chemist Warehouse branding, and that's going to be a magnificent episode all about pregnancy and also childbirth as well.
To learn more about myself or Joe, you can also find us on Melbourne IVF's website at www.mivf.com.au.
So thank you so much for listening today. We hope you found this episode helpful as you embark on your fertility journey. Violet, thank you for joining me today. For all things fertility, subscribe now on our Apple Podcasts, Spotify or YouTube channel. Connect with us on Instagram at fertileminds_official to join the conversation. Do you have any fertility questions? Send us a message on Instagram and our fertility experts will answer your question in the next episode.